They say a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. Well, with God as my witness, I am that fool.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg, and it's time for our second deck tech of Ixalan Standard. And it's the other one that everyone's been waiting on, and I know you're going to like it because it's all about booty. We're going to talk pirates today. On a serious note, though, before we start, real quick, just so you know, this deck went through more testing and more rewrites than just about any other deck that I have ever done for this channel. So we tried an awful lot of cards here, a lot of different strategies. We went 3 colors, we went 2 colors, we went 2 different colors. We finally ended up with something that I think I can be proud to give to you and will win you some games if you build it. So, that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at Blue-Black Pirates. First of all, another apology. I know a lot of people want to see Grixis Pirates. I totally sympathize with that sentiment. Deck looks super hot when I drew it up. But once you start testing, you realize quickly that Pirates is predominantly a tempo strategy. And above all else, tempo needs to be reliable. It needs to have mana consistency. And when you have that third color, you really don't get enough of that a lot of the time. And it's much harder to dictate the pace of the game when you can't even get the mana that you need. So honestly, I felt like adding a third color really made the deck worse in a lot of ways and drove up the budget. Those are 2 things that you don't want. I mean, I kind of look at it as my job here on the channel to help you win F&M and do so for as little money as possible whenever possible. And I don't feel like the Grixis version of the deck really served either of those purposes. It's specifically not my job to just throw all the cards together that everyone wants to see and then call that a good deck and send you home with it, because like most times it wouldn't be a good deck, it'd be lip service, it'd kind of be dishonest. So I'm just going to try and bring you what I honestly think is the best version of this deck, and I'm sorry if it doesn't have some stuff in it that you wanted to see. So monologue over, let's look at the deck. Let's start by looking at the pirates, because that's what you come for, I would imagine. We're going to play 23 creatures in this deck, all of which are swashbucklers. And we're going to start by playing 4 copies of Siren Stormtamer in pretty much any pirates deck with blue. I think we can all agree that this is one of the best creatures in our starting 60, no joke. Just a tempo deck's dream, you know, early body that usually translates to a few damage for you, can chump block when you're done with it if you really needed to, or it can jump in front of removal on a more important creature. It's just, again, easily one of the best creatures in the entire deck. We need early drops because we're tempo, and there's really no better one than this. I'm also going to play a whole 3 copies, this is the first controversial thing we'll talk about, a whole 3 copies of Deadeye Tracker in the deck. First of all, one of the main reasons we're playing Tracker is because, again, we need early drops. I can't stress that enough. We have to activate Raid on a guy as early as turn 2, and we have to have Lookout's Dispersal up as early as turn 2 sometimes, too. So I want to be able to play a 1-drop almost every game, and honestly, I feel like we could play more 1-drops. I just didn't want to push it to 4 copies of Tracker. Tracker is also just kind of a better creature than a lot of people give him credit for, at least so far, you know. All the stuff this 1-drop can do is pretty good. It can draw you cards in the form of lands, and in a way, it can push the land count down a little bit. I might want to play 25 lands, but I'm only playing 24, and some of the reason for that is because we have Deadeye Tracker. If he's not drawing you cards, he's getting bigger, and anytime you can push a 1-drop to 2 power is pretty sweet right there. You can also disrupt graveyard strategies, you know. There's Earthshaker Kenra, there's Dread Wanderer, there's Scrapheap Scrounger, Godfarer's Gift, Liliana Death's Majesty. There's a ton of graveyard strategies that are still present in this standard, and so you really don't lack a whole lot of like targets for Deadeye Tracker. Give Tracker a shot. I promise you the card's better than it looks. And again, even if you hate the card, we need another 1-drop pirate really, really bad, and this is easily the best choice because it's kind of the only other choice. On to the 2-drops, though. I've decided that 3 copies is right for Kitesail Freebooter, although a lot of people are still discussing what the right number is. A Freebooter is another thing that can protect our guys from removal, you know. It's sort of a very much more proactive Siren Stormtamer, you know. Get that stuff out of their hand, and there's a lot of stuff to have to worry about. Ramanap Red's still going to be a very, very important deck in the upcoming standard, so you may have to worry about Shock, Magma Spray, Lightning Strike, definitely. A Braid occasionally. From Teamer Energy, they've got Harness Lightning, you know, and some other stuff. There's also Fatal Push, there's Walk the Plank, Never Return, Sweepers of all stripes, so there's so much that we have to worry about in Ixalan Standard that I think the 3 of Freebooter is about right, that I don't want to top deck him all the time, thus I won't put him at a 4 of. But I think 3's right, again, because there's so much that this can hit. I'm going to play 3 copies of Fathom Fleet Captain in the deck, and I started at 4 with this one and brought it down to 3. Not necessarily because it's a bad top deck, although it's not really the best top deck ever either. It's mostly because it's not super great in multiples unless you have a bunch of mana to spend on it. So I'm just going to go with 3 copies here, but that said, you won't be able to fathom the fleet that this captain can give you some of the time. I really like that you go ahead and get this trigger when he attacks. He doesn't have to do combat damage. That is incredibly important because he will usually replace himself when he swings in with a better creature, a creature with 1 more toughness and that still has menace. It's really good, and if you can get him through continually and continue to make dudes, you know, first time you get a free guy, but he sort of has to survive combat to get any more dudes out of him, obviously. But if Captain can make 2 or even 3 guys for you in a game, you have just gone very, very wide, especially considering if you're just attacking with them, each one is kind of like 2 guys because they all have menace, so it gets really tough to block the fleet that Captain gives you. Now, I'm going to play 4 copies of a creature that is a bit of a surprise, I'm sure, for some people. And that is Stormfleet Aerialist, believe it or not. Now, first of all, let me just say this. There's going to be a section at the end of this video for cards that I didn't play and sort of quick answers as to why. So just remember that. Just remember that. But the reason I chose to play Aerialist is because it is easily, at least in testing, the most reliable source of early and mid-game even damage that we have. One more time, just kind of hammering it home because I know a lot of people will not agree with this inclusion over some other stuff. And again, I'll talk about that later, but at this point, I wouldn't be caught dead not playing Aerialist, you know? It's just a reliable source of damage, and we need that. It was not hard at all in most games to get 4 to 6 at least damage out of an Aerialist before they could really deal with it. And that's exactly what we need in a deck that can control the first 4 or 5 turns pretty easily, but will start petering out after then, even with all the onboard effects and mana sinks that we have. So we need a reliable source of damage so we can more easily close games, and Aerialist was very good for that, surprisingly. To finish off the 2-drops, we're going to play 2 copies of Daring Saboteur in the deck. That makes 19 different pirates that are 2 mana or less, which will really, really help us cast Lookout's Dispersal as early as possible. That's one of the reasons that we want to do that. I wanted to play at least 18 pirates that were 2 mana or less to help out Lookout's Dispersal as much as we could, because it's one of the best cards in the deck. So I wanted to play a bunch of pirates. Needed a high concentration of them at low costs on the curve, but that doesn't mean that Daring Saboteur is just thrown in there. This is actually another card that surprised me a good bit, mostly because it's good in the early game. It's more likely if you play this on turn 2, especially on the play, that you'll be able to get it through at least once, if not twice, get 4 damage out of it and 2 loots. That's awesome. But it's also good if you draw it in the late game. This is a very fine top deck a lot of the time because it can force itself through and filter you some cards. So, and get 2 damage through. That's kind of, you don't see that every day on these sort of loot guys, and especially one that can go unblockable. That's just, it's not bad. This is another card, just like Aerialist, that can force through 6 damage in a game pretty easily, and draw you some cards, too. So, Saboteur really, really impressed me. It didn't 4 copies impress me, but it's such a good top deck that I'll at least play the 2 copies of it. Again, this card is a little bit better than it appeared to me at first glance. And we're going to play 4 copies of Hostage Taker. That's right, I skipped 3 on the curve. We'll get to Ruin Raider later. Don't worry, and don't kill me. I know a lot of people like that card. I'll get to it later. But in any case, Hostage Taker is probably my favorite pirate in the entire deck. Another card that I would not play 4 copies of, no matter what. In this tempo build, I also considered Dreamcaller Siren. It performed very admirably in testing. Just to let you know, Dreamcaller Siren is very good. There's a reason it was on my sleepers list, but end of the day, we can't play all those 4 drops, especially in a deck that's sort of an aggro tempo deck and wants to play a lot of little guys, you know? We couldn't afford like 6 or 8 4 drops. So I decided to go with Hostage Taker because it is, again, more reliably good than something like Dreamcaller Siren. It sets up pretty much automatic 2-for-1s. You get a guy, you take away their guy, and if you can protect your Hostage Taker, which is not hard in this deck, there's a lot of ways to do that, then you can just cast their guy for whatever mana that you want. So getting a body and eventually getting a creature out of it, provided again that you can protect your Hostage Taker, is crazy. Like, this feels better than Spell Queller a lot of the time. Onto the spells here. We've got 13 of them in the deck, and I'm going to start with 4 copies of Fatal Push and sort of watch the budget just do this right out the window. Sorry about that, but Fatal Push is still incredibly important. I've already said this, but we will see more Ramanap Red. Fatal Push is very, very good in that matchup, which is kind of bad for us. Like, the matchup is not our best matchup in any way. So we need as many tools in that matchup game 1 as we possibly can. But there's also like green-black decks that'll run Long Tusk Cub and the Snake and a bunch of other stuff. You know, there's just energy decks, period, that we're going to have to worry about a bunch of creatures in. There's a few different aggro decks. There's other pirate decks, you know. So, like, there are very, very, very many targets in Ixalan Standard for a Fatal Push, even one that's not revolted. So I'm going to play all 4 copies. Not going to be caught with our pants down against Ramanap Red. We want to shore up that match as much as possible. Play the 4. Probably the most surprising card in the entire deck for some people. I know that some people are going to dig this, but probably the most surprising card for a lot of people is the 2 copies of Unsummon that I'm playing. I know I probably do have some explaining to do, so let me get right down to it. First of all, we're a tempo deck. And Unsummon is a legendary tempo card, you know. Unsummon is all about tempo, you know. It can sometimes equate to a time walk. It really can. If their whole turn 4 revolves around playing Hazoret and swinging with it, you can just take away their turn 4 for 1 mana. With Glorybringer, they just played their Glorybringer on turn 5, you know. When they declare their attack step, pop it back to their hand for 1 mana. You ain't exerting nothing this turn, and you certainly aren't flying in for 4. Just wait till next turn to play that Glorybringer when you'll probably already be dead. So, yeah, this tempo is really important, and Unsummon gives us more tempo for very, very little mana than a lot of cards can. It's also yet another way of saving our guys. If we have to save our guys, you know. We can get another Enter the Battlefield trigger off of a couple of dudes, you know. So this is just an all-around utility card that allows us to do stuff. On like turn 3 or turn 4, you know, turn 3 we can cast a 2-drop, leave mana up for Unsummon, or go ahead and cast our Unsummon and get something out of the way for our attack step. We can also, like, turn 4, you know, we can play a 2-drop and then 2 1-drops. Unsummon is our 13th 1-drop card in this deck, which really helps us sort of fill out our curve a lot of the time and play it on top of other stuff in a given turn. That can be really important for a tempo deck that's trying to generate early game advantage. I'm going to play 3 copies of Walk the Plank because it's good. This card is good. I'm serious. A lot of people lament the sorcery speed on this card, and I'm one of those people too. I don't like that. But it's still a pretty good answer for a lot of really big creatures, especially big dinosaurs, you know. Doesn't answer Carnage Tyrant, and game 1 we kind of have a serious problem with the resolve Carnage Tyrant, which it always resolves because it can't be countered. We have a serious problem game 1 with it. We've got some tools in the sideboard. But aside from that, this will kill pretty much every big dinosaur and a bunch of other big creatures people are playing in Standard. Kills Glorybringer the turn after it swings. That kind of sucks, but it still kills it. As I think about Walk the Plank, we'll take it. not the absolute best removal spell, but it kills pretty much everything without indestructible or hexproof in this Standard because there's really not a whole lot of merfolk that are going to see play, at least from what any of us can tell at this point, people that are testing this format. So Walk the Plank is just a really, really reliable and consistent removal piece that'll kill most anything. And finally, we're going to play 4 copies of Lookouts Dispersal, because it is another one of the best cards in the entire deck. Seriously, we got to play 4. Actually, starting with 3, but you want to see it all the time on turns 3 and 4. This is another reason that 2-drops aren't bad in this deck, and neither are 1-drops. On turn 3, we can drop a 1-drop and have mana open for Lookouts Dispersal. Same thing with turn 4. Drop a 2-drop, leave mana open for Lookouts Dispersal. Especially on turn 4, you're going to want to be countering Hazarets and Bristling Hydras and Ripjaw Raptors and all kinds of stuff on turn 4. So it is very important some of the time, depending on the matchup, to hold up mana for this in the early and mid game. That said, though, this still isn't a bad card in the late game. This almost always counters Torrential Gearhulk. Pretty much every time, unless they have a counterspell for it. And it's going to counter a lot of other late game stuff. Sweepers and stuff, if they try to Hour of Devastation you, they essentially have to have 9 mana to be able to do that, and they're almost never going to. So this can even counter stuff well past the mid-game a lot of the time. Lookouts Dispersal is just fantastic, man. We got 23 pirates in the deck, and 19 of them are 1 or 2 mana. So starting turn 3, you'll almost always have the ability to dispersal something. And on the play, that's just invaluable. We gotta play all 4. Here are your lands right here. You may notice there's only 3 Drowned Catacombs and 3 Fetid Pools. I've decided to do that because I wanted untapped blue or black mana on turn 1 as much as possible, and this mana base allows us 10 blue or black mana that can come into play untapped on turn 1. I think it's incredibly important. We're trying to cast a blue 1-drop and a black 1-drop, so we got to have untapped mana as often as possible. That said, Fetid Pools is still good. It works with Drowned Catacomb, or if we draw it late or we're flooded, whatever, then it's a drawn card. That's good. And Drowned Catacombs is fine too. I just don't want, in a tempo deck especially, a bunch of lands that come into play tapped, because that can kind of wreck everything for us sometimes. Here's our sideboard right here, and there's the Ruin Raider. Now, here's the reason. I've already talked about Ramanap Red a few times in this video, and I know some people hate the sort of meta-analysis that I do because you're more worried about your F&Ms, and I get that. But Ramanap Red is going to be an important deck in the upcoming Standard. It's still real. It's still alive. And if a lot of people at your F&M were playing it pre-rotation, I don't see why they'd stop playing it post-rotation if they already have most of the pieces. So I think it's going to be an important deck to beat, and a deck that will sit down across from a lot. And Ruin Raider is very, very, very bad in that matchup, especially game 1. I do not want to see Ruin Raider against Ramanap Red. So I have confined it to the sideboard where it does very, very well against the blue-white approach decks that I also think will be really important. Your life total is much more of a resource in that matchup and in slower matchups, period. So I'll confine Ruin Raider to the board here because against the aggro matchup, not just Ramanap Red, but aggro in general, Ruin Raider was not good and could sometimes come very close to just outright killing us. On that note, though, we're going to talk about aggro again for a second. Gifted Aetherborn looks so weird, but this is very good against a couple of specific decks. Ramanap Red being one of them. Gifted Aetherborn has always been good in that matchup, but it's also one of our best answers to a resolved Carnage Tyrant, which we have no real main deck answers for. So something like Gifted Aetherborn is twofold good. Good against aggro, and one of our only real options to deal with a Carnage Tyrant. Doomfall is the other option for dealing with a resolved Carnage Tyrant, although this can sometimes also kill gods and whatnot, but I usually won't bring it in unless we're specifically trying to deal with Carnage Tyrant or we're up against control. So we're going to have to board out a lot of our removal anyway. Doomfall will usually come in to make them discard key cards. So another sideboard card that is twofold good, specifically Carnage Tyrant, but also a lot of play against control decks. Chart of Course will come in against control, because again, we got to take out most of our removal, and Chart of Course is just good when it comes to just trying to win the card advantage race. Vraska's Contempt is an option against Hazaret that we'll need, and also Ronus and other Indestructibles and such, but mostly Hazaret, and is specifically good in the Ramanap Red matchup. Even though it's slow, it'll kill Hazaret for good and gain you a couple of life back. That's a good card. And then the Scarab God will come in against control and even mid-range strategies. A lot of the time, yet another twofold good card. I started out with 2 Scarab Gods, but I figured that 1 is all we need, especially against control decks. If we can just make it so that we can resolve a Scarab God, we will win the game a lot of the time. Now, before I get to the power rankings, I just wanted to talk about a couple of cards that I didn't play here that I know I'll get questions about. The first of which is Fel Flagship. This just wasn't impactful enough, which is the answer to a lot of the why didn't I play this or that card questions, It wasn't quite impactful enough, especially for 3 mana. I wouldn't mind an Anthem, don't get me wrong, but this doesn't usually swing in. You don't want it to swing in. A lot of the time, it's not evasive in any way. It's a little bit clunky. And overall, I didn't think 3 mana was worth the slot for a +1/+0 Anthem effect. If it was +1/+1, we might be talking, but honestly, I just didn't feel like the card was quite there. We already have good sideboard options against control decks anyway, which this could be, but I like things like Ruin Raider and others a little bit better than this card, all in all. The big question, I would imagine at least, is why didn't I play Skyship Plunderer and Jace Cunning Castaway? I would love to answer that question, because there's kind of a lot of reasons, actually. First of all, Skyship Plunderer is really only good with Jace and Stormfleet Aerialist. It's not bad with Aerialist at all, and as a matter of fact, I kind of like it more with Aerialist, making Aerialist bigger and bigger as the game goes on. That's a good reason to play Plunderer, honestly. But I didn't think that it worked very well with Jace at all. Sometimes it will lead to a turn 4 ultimate. Yes, turn 4 ultimate sounds really, really good, but you got to play your Skyship Plunderer before your Jace. You have to draw both of them early in the game on curve. You have to, your Skyship Plunderer has to live. It's got to get through. It's got to put the extra counter on the Jace. The Jace can't get hit in, the turn that you have to wait to actually get the ultimate. There's just a lot of things that have to fall into place to actually get the ultimate, and if you do get the turn 4 ultimate, it's just kind of cute. Like, look what's happening on turn 4 in this format. People are playing Hazaret on turn 4. People are playing Regisar Alpha on turn 4, and sometimes Carnage Tyrant on turn 4. So our 2 planeswalkers on turn 4 that usually translate into 2 illusions is not good enough. It's kind of just cute. So it just didn't really work the way I and a lot of people want it to work, and you had to devote too many slots to a 2-card combo that doesn't work a lot of the time. So I didn't like it. I again felt like it was just a little bit too cute. There's also Spell Pierce, which could have made a sideboard appearance, but honestly, we've got plenty of ways to protect our dudes already. I also considered Duress, by the way, for the same reason, just a 1-mana thing that makes our guys harder to target. But we've already got a lot of bodies that do that, and we've got a counter spell that helps us do that. We've got Unsummon to help us protect our guys too. There's just already enough ways, I think, in the deck to make this work, although I would not be averse to a 2 of Spell Pierce in the sideboard. I really wouldn't. I just, at this time at least, don't feel like it's entirely necessary. And finally, the card that I'd be most willing to include, to be honest, is Favorable Winds. For the longest time, I was not sure which deck I was going to show you until like the day before I recorded this. I wasn't sure if I was going to show you this version or the Favorable Winds Blue-Black Pirates version, because that deck is really, really cheap. It's like $25, and it wins, man. Like, it's got like 20 some odd flyers in it. A lot of them really, really low on the curve, and Favorable Winds is an amazing anthem for them. That's really hard for the opponent to do anything about once it's on the battlefield. There's not a lot of enchantment destruction that people are actually playing, aside from like Cast Out, and who wants to cast out a Favorable Winds? So, just Favorable Winds, this version of the deck is actually pretty darn good, honestly, and I think that it may end up being the better Pirates deck. So I was a little concerned over which version I wanted to show you. I just want to point out during this version that Favorable Winds is actually a very good card in these pirate decks if you devote pretty much every slot to a flying creature. You can still play spells, but all your creatures fly. Favorable Winds is really good. Here are your power rankings right here. Final score of 66. Resiliency is our worst category, but that's mitigated somewhat by the fact that we have a lot of ways of keeping our guys from dying. But once our guys do die, or if we do get swept, we are in a high amount of trouble. Let me just say, especially game 1, before we can board in our Scarab God. So we are in some trouble especially if we get swept. Look out for Sweltering Suns. It's a problem. So keep that in mind. But all of our other stats are good. We have relatively high, or at least above average, defense and offense scores. Mark of a good deck, and especially a tempo deck, because it's got a fair amount of answers, and a lot of those answers are on bodies. That said, usual disclaimer for a tempo deck. Tempo decks are among the most intelligent decks in Magic. Let me say that much. You have to make an awful lot of decisions about how to use your mana and how to cast your spells and how to sequence your turns in a tempo deck. And it really teaches you a lot, man. Like every time I play a tempo deck, I'm reminded how hard this game is sometimes. But if you play well, if you know what you're attempting to answer, which is, by the way, just so you know, why I keep bringing up metagame stuff in this video, I keep talking about Ramanap Red and some other decks. That's because tempo decks are very reliant on what the meta is. So it's kind of important. You have to talk about it when you're talking about a tempo deck. So you have to know what you're answering and sort of the best way to play against every deck in the format. So tempo is a little difficult to get the hang of, but once you do, you'll be a much better Magic player for it. But I'm tapped out for now. I'm pretty sure that's all I've got for this one, but continue the discussion in the comments section. Let me know how you felt about this one down there. If there's any cards that I didn't play that you really think I definitely should have played, then let me know. Always all ears on that one. Interested in what you're interested in. But in any case, I think it's time to do the YouTube spiel. If you liked the video, please like the video. You can also sub if you're new for all the deck tech action in Ixalan Standard. You can follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. Or if you want to support the deck tech action, you can always kick me a buck on Patreon at patreon.com/SBMTG. And remember that this video is brought to you in part by TCGplayer.com. There where you can pre-order all of these cards at these fabulous prices listed in this video. So just remember to click the deck list in the description of this video. Both of them, again, I'll give you this one and the Favorable Winds version. Just clicking those links and going to TCG Player helps the channel out, helps them out, helps you out too, because they have some of the best prices on the interwebs. So do all that stuff, and I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards.